Hello, so glad you could join us today for us to discuss exploring math through purposeful play. I'm appreciative of the time that you've taken out of your day to join me. And I know that these last 12 months have been so different for all of us. And I want you to know that I appreciate your commitment to young children during this pandemic. I know you've been essential in supporting young children and families as they navigate these uncharted waters. And I appreciate you and thank you for all the efforts and sacrifices that you have personally made to ensure that every child and family that you have in your care and work with are met, that their needs are met to the best of your abilities. I'm Pam Perino, and I'm an early childhood advocate and educational consultant. I've been as a classroom teacher, a preschool administrator, a child care center director, a Catholic school board member, an adjunct professor at the University of Dayton. I've been across our field and our profession in many different roles, and I appreciate each and every one of you in the roles that you're in. I also want to take this time to thank RCL Benzinger and Kendall Hunt for their sponsoring of this presentation and for giving me the time to be with you. I'm very appreciative of your time and their efforts to make this happen. So this is new for all of us. Many of us have not done virtual learning, and I'm just learning how to do the pre-recorded for you. But I would like to honor our faith, and as we always do at the beginning of sessions, I'd like to begin in prayer. So if you would join me for a moment, just to quiet ourselves, to settle ourselves and take a deep breath. And then let's ask and begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, who hovered over the waters of creation, enkindle in me the fire of your love. May I cooperate with your grace to guide the children to discover the goodness of your creation. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I'm hoping you're still taking a deep breath and centering yourself and getting ready to enjoy our time together. I'd like to let you know a little bit what I'm hoping that you're going to be able to leave this presentation with today, our time that has been spent together. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to identify why joyful, purposeful play is so important to you and to the children and families that you work with. I'm hoping that you will leave being able to identify strategies that will support students in exploring principles of number sense, operations, measurements, geometry, spatial relations. But they need to be doing it while they're having fun and making joyful connections. As we start, I want to really ensure that each and every one of us is on the same page with the information that we have so that we know that we're all starting from the same place. So what I wanted to start with you is the National Association of Education's position statement. They just released a 4th edition of this, an updated version in November. And this wasn't done with the intent that the pandemic was coming. It was done with the intent because we knew that we know more about children and families today. We have more research that helps guide us with this. So what I want you to remember here when we talk about this, we're talking about each and every child as an individual, birth through 8. That each and every child has that equitable learning opportunity, whether it's in centers, whether it's in a family childcare, whether it's in a home, whether it's in school, whether it's in a faith formation program. We have to meet and provide for optimal development for these children, learning across all of their domains and content areas. Now, today we're going to talk a lot about the cognition piece, and we're going to talk about maths particularly, but we can't leave the other pieces out because children don't come to us in isolation. And what we need to remember too is the degree to which early learning programs support children. We need to keep the delight and the wonder and the reflection and the quality of the setting that we're providing for them, even during a pandemic. And we have to maximize every opportunity that we have for learning so that we can help each and every child meet their full potential. Now, NAYC, the National Association of Education of Young Children, goes a step further as well. They go on to talk about 3 core considerations that they have embedded within developmentally appropriate practice. So as we start to look at these slides, and I'm not going to read every single box to you because I know that you're probably doing that while I'm talking, I'll try to share some of the key points that I really want us to remember from here. I want us to know that when we talk about working with young children, we're acknowledging the fact that every child is different in our classroom. Even if they're from the same street, live in the same hometown, we have to know that each child is a unique, beautiful gift from God. They come with their own cultural backgrounds. They come with their own linguistic experiences within their families and their community. And they come with their own real life experiences that they have lived in their very short period of time, but they're theirs. And those experiences create the being that they are and the gifts that they bring to us. Secondly, children's first and most important teacher will always be and has always been their family and the community from which they come. And when we are creating learning experiences and thinking about these children, we need to make a commitment to remember that we can never leave the families out. These different types of family types and community structures will need to always be forefront for us when we're thinking of the best ways to approach learning with young children, whether it be in our room, whether it be in a hybrid, whether it be face-to-face and then hybrid or totally virtual. We need to think about these families, which I know that you've been doing, but it's just a reminder so we're all on the same page. Thirdly, our program and approaches to the learning environments must be, without a shadow of a doubt, able to acknowledge and validate and honor the cultural and individuality of the children and families that we serve. Let me pause there for a minute. I really want you to think about that. I should not be walking into a preschool classroom or a kindergarten classroom and seeing that every single one of those classrooms is set up exactly the same, because not every single classroom has the same group of children in it. Each culture within that room is unique and different based on the individuals that you have in there, from the teacher to the aide to the children and the families. Wow. I've certainly asked you to think about a lot and commit to a lot already, and we've only gone through 2 slides of content. I'm not asking you to be perfect with this. What I'm asking is for us just to kind of reflect on this as we talk about opportunities that may exist. And I also want to acknowledge and validate that this commitment has really been amplified as a direct result of working in the midst of a pandemic. And I know that it's been difficult to go from in-person to hybrid to virtual to maybe a combination of both. I would assume it can feel like a mountain only continues to grow taller and steeper, and that the target keeps in the bar of the target keeps getting rose to a higher and higher level. Online learning could sometimes have felt very isolating with you, with so much distance between your children. If you're like me, I'm a hugger, and it's really hard for me to work with young children right now and not be encouraged to have that contact. What I do want you to know is that we're all learning together how to adjust, how to adapt, how to figure this out. And we're not asking anybody to be perfect. We're just asking us to be reflective and hope that each and every day we bring you back to the fundamentals of developmentally appropriate practice, joyful learning, and investigative play. So one more piece from the NAYC, the National Association of Education of Young Children, is these principles of development and learning. So we're going to kind of go through this a little bit. So if we look at the first bullet point, what we're saying here is learning is not a static process. It's a dynamic process that may vary from child to child, may vary from day to day, depending on how the child and honestly, how the adult facilitator in the environment is feeling. Children do not learn in isolation in their domain. So although we're talking about math today, you can't just pull out a math activity and not have it hit social emotional, have it hit some science standards, because young children don't learn in isolation. They learn as the whole of themselves. We also know on the third bullet point here that play is so important to children's learning. In fact, one can say that play is a child's work. We know, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the brain research shortly, about how neuron connections are supported through play. We know that in bullet number 4, that child development can be identified in best practices, early learning developmental standards, but we know that not every child progresses in the same way, and we have to always remember to allow and accommodate for those variations. Number 5, if any of you have ever worked with young children, had any of your own, you know they're constant motion. You don't only go home physically tired at the day, you're going home emotionally tired because their little brains are moving so quickly and processing. You're having to move at 100 miles an hour to keep up with all that. When we look at number 6, children's motivation to learn is increased and fostered when they feel like they belong to the group, when they feel that the learning's purposeful and that they are supported by the adults and the children in the classroom around them. In number 7, children can't work in isolation. They need to be integrated. So, even in kindergarten, if we're reading a story about gardening, then we should be exploring it in the science area and having opportunities to grow. And in the math area, maybe we're counting seeds and counting little pots, but we're connecting those pieces purposely together for them. When we talk about number 8 and we look into these challenges that children are facing, what I want you to understand, and it's one of my favorite phrases I like to remind early educators of, is that we must be working with children to make it challenging, but achievable. So when we provide things for young children to explore, challenging, but achievable, because if we keep asking children to do things they're not ready to do yet, they eventually are going to emotionally and shut down. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in the brain development shortly. When we look at bullet point number 9, we have to be using technology intentionally and responsibly. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the best recommendations for time on technology is. And I know that we may be exceeding that in the current world that we're in, but there's ways that we can make it more developmentally appropriate. So as we think about all this information, I alluded to this already a little bit. I'm going to borrow some information from Dr. Becky Bailey, who I have extreme respect for from Conscious Discipline. And what I want to share here with you is that when we look at this first brain on the left, you can see the red area of the brain. And this is called our brainstem, or better known when we think about children socially, emotionally. And I'm going to preface even adults' brains work this way. We're in a survival state. So let's face it, at the beginning of this pandemic, we were all here trying to figure out how to move forward. But what's really important for us to understand is when we're in this red zone, when we're in the brainstem, this is this beautiful function of the brain that when we're in this area, it's what we call our flight response. The brain is wired to protect our bodies and shut down all unnecessary information and functions to protect the body. So when a child is hungry, when a child is sick, when they're scared, they're in this brainstem mode. The body is asking for basic functions to be met, all other functions to be shut down so that the body can survive and remain alive. The goal is to not have children in the brain state. The second state is called the emotional state. You can see that in blue in the middle brain icon there. And that is in the limbic area in the middle of the brain. When we think about this, this is more our emotional state. And we might be there today for some of us. This occurs in the middle of the brain. This is the area where the child's emotions are generated from. If the child's scared, if they're overstimulated, if they're confused, if they're frustrated, and etc. What happens here is the child becomes upset, they become agitated, and the only really way to calm the state is to make a connection with the child, to let them know that they're safe, that everything's going to be okay, and that we help them build strategies to learn to calm down. Yeah, you might do something with, there's a trick with Thomas the Turtle, where when you're really upset, you have your hand here and you kind of pull the head back in and you take a deep breath and you count to 3, deep, blow it out. Then we talk to each other. Some people have referred to this as mindfulness and the ability to calm oneself and do self-regulation. But you can't focus on learning new information when you're in the emotional state. So the third brain is called the executive state. And this occurs in the prefrontal lobe of the brain. This is where we want to be, right? We want our children here. We want to be here. This is where executive function happens. This is where self-regulation develops. This is where we can control our thoughts and our emotions. And only here, only when we get to this state can we begin to problem solve. Can we begin to process new information for new strategies? This is where we find ourselves in children doing their optimal work and learning, and this includes us. You know, if you remember at the beginning of this presentation, I asked all of us to take a moment and take a deep breath. And I took us into prayer so that we could calm ourselves before we came forward to learn some new techniques and new information. So we talked a little bit about the brain, and I've again borrowed some wonderful insight from the Center of the Developing Child at Harvard University. And I've also taken some information here from the American Pediatric Association and from NAYC, the National Association of Education, and from the Fred Rogers Research Center in Pittsburgh. And what I really want to stress here in this particular slide to you is that when you look at the normal brain development in the Harvard University slide, you'll notice that there's many more neuron synapses and connections occurring versus the child that has toxic stress occurring in the bottom where the red toxic stress words are at. And what we're saying here is when I'm in that emotional state, when I'm in that flight fright mode, I can't process. I can't make mental connections. This is what physically happens in my brain. And when I'm under constant stress, I lose many connections that I really need for productivity later in life. There's lots of opinions too on the screen time information you see to the left of the slide. And I think what I want to explain to you is we know we are not in the best case scenario in the middle of a pandemic if you're still having to work virtually. And again, I thank you for making the best of this. But the key takeaway here is that we need to learn to do it better. We need to learn to do it more interactive. We need to learn to make it more creative. And it doesn't have to be hard. And we're going to share some strategies here in a little bit with you. If you know your students are under stress, we know that the brain's being impacted. You get to see their home environment sometimes if you're teaching virtually, and there might not be a quiet spot to learn in. So in the middle of this pandemic, we need to think about the way we're approaching this learning, and we need to find a healthier environment. We're going to talk a little bit about environment, but we're also going to talk a lot about the need for the body to move and the brain to be making neuron connections through movement for young children, because we talked about how that's developmentally appropriate. So before we get into those strategies, and I know I keep telling you we're going to get there soon, I want you to reflect for just a minute on your learning style as an adult. This is called the VARC learning style, and I have the references at the end of the slide for you. It's not as much the detail that I want you to pull in the individual as much as the overall concept. You know that learners are multimodality, but what we kind of need to think about ourselves is, am I a visual learner? Do I learn best through pictures and diagrams and illustrations? Am I an aoral learner where I like to listen and lectures just are wonderful, and I love to listen to podcasts and recordings because I get things better that way? Am I more of a reader or a writer where I'm looking at these reading materials? And understand, for a young child, this would be included picture print books, but also like inventive writing, the love to draw and represent what they're experiencing. Under kinesthetics, this is this need to move, to experience it, to manipulate it, activities to explore what you just told me, let me figure it out for myself and build it and have it break and then do it again and figure out, do I really understand the concept? The reason I bring this information to you is because you need to remember that as an adult, putting together these experiences for children will tend to build that experience more around the way we like to learn, the way we like to teach. And probably if you were to rate yourself on this wheel, and let's just say that your least favorite style is visual, that's probably the one that you don't present enough for your children. So I'm giving you this strategy for you to kind of just be reflective and think about, where might be my weaknesses and where might be my opportunities, so that I make sure I'm learning letting all the young children in my classroom have the best possible learning style. And I would say too, when you're communicating with families, this is important information as well. We need to know our families well enough to know how do they like to receive information. So we're getting closer. Now I'm going to talk about the environment when we're thinking about developmentally appropriate math opportunities. This is a typical preschool kindergarten classroom. You can see that the materials are set out. We have books about math in the math area. We have small manipulatives. Most everything that I am looking at here currently can be disinfected in one manner or another. We may have to think about how we're going to limit the number of children that can use the Learning Center at one time if we're in person because we're trying to social distance. We may have to think about disinfecting between the Monday, Wednesday, Friday group versus the Tuesday, Thursday group, because again, we need to deal with these concepts around the pandemic. We may have to also think about how we individualize some of the manipulatives. We might store them in a plastic shoebox. We might store them in a Ziploc bag so that if it can't be disinfected, it's only being used by that one particular child. However, we do know that the CDC has really stressed to us that washing and mask are one of the key factors in preventing the spread of COVID. Although I know that in some states, we're not asking children under the age of 5 to wear masks. The adults should be wearing them and role modeling that. And we need to be supportive of the families who have concerns. And I know that you're all doing that. However, we must not lose sight that we still have to be developmentally appropriate and honor who the child is and what their learning styles are. Because I fear sometimes, and maybe I'm wrong in my perception, that we are so focused on catching up and closing the learning gap that we've forgotten that we need to check in on our little ones, ourselves, and our families, and make sure that they're okay socially and emotionally. Let's go back to our mental models that I shared with you from Dr. Becky Bailey. We can't really help close the learning gap if we're in the fight mode, or if we're in that middle brain in the limbic system and we're just too emotional. It's only when we move to the frontal cortex in that green mode where we can really help children close that learning gap. So we can't forget about the social emotional component as we think about what type of opportunities we're going to give children for learning. Now, as we move forward in our teaching, whether it's in person, whether it's virtual, whether it's hybrid, we need to ensure and make a promise that it's going to be a joyful, emotional connection with hands-on, exploratory activities that are sure to bring smiles to you, your children, and your families, because then we're in that green brain, remember? So as I thought about this presentation, and I thought about, well, sometimes our resources are limited. Sometimes we're in this mix of a hybrid, in-person, virtual. I walked around my house, literally with a small laundry basket, grabbing supplies that I could find, thinking that maybe your children might have these in their home, or you might have them in your classroom. In fact, my husband came home one day from work and I had them spread across the living room floor prepping for this presentation. And he said, now I know what you do all day while I'm at work, you're playing. And I said, well, play is children's work, and I'm preparing a presentation for children. You can see a multitude of open-ended types of materials here. There's paper plates, there's Legos, there's a calendar, there's a muffin tin, there's funnels and measuring cups and dice and poker chips and cookie cutters and Uno deck and paper clips and on. But I'm going to show you what we've done with some of these materials to provide opportunities and strategies to work on some of our fundamental cognitive math skills that we're trying to teach with young children. So when we talk about number sense, what we're really talking about is that children are learning that numbers represent something like a quantity. We're asking them to demonstrate the understanding that that word represents a quantity or a set. We're asking them how they can create their own sets at home or use other things to make a part of something and a whole of something. So what I've done here, as you can see, is I'm using some poker chips. And what I had is paper plates. Now, I'll preface, if this is in your particular classroom, you may want to use the heavier plastic paper plates that you could wipe off and disinfect. The poker chips can definitely be disinfected. And what I've done is taken a permanent marker, traced the pattern of the poker chip for correspondence here. So we're asking the children and asking them if they can put and match the circles. And we're identifying the numbers for them so that we're helping them make that correlation between a printed number 1 means 1 of something. And then they have this opportunity to explore it, manipulate it. And again, it's somewhat self-correcting. So this is an activity that you could have the children actually do in front of you while you're doing a visual or virtual meeting. And you could have them make it, and then you could have them manipulate as you're introducing the concept. And then it's theirs to play with at home, or it's theirs to use when they're in the math center. So when we look at number sense again, this is a little bit higher level. This is like the next step after the poker chop, because again, we're using those same paper plates, but now I'm using dice. And they don't match up perfect, right? But I can touch my finger on the 1 dot and then put my finger on the 1 dot on the plate and say, there's 1 dot. On the 2, we're doing the same thing. So it's just another way that I can use dice to explore this concept at a little bit deeper level. Now, because, and I want to bring in a piece, because when we work with young children on a concept, we're using, like, if you can imagine a big funnel, we're starting with the bigger concept, and then we go deeper and deeper into layers and make it a little bit more difficult, because that's what's developmentally appropriate in children's learning. Here, I've taken the similar concept, but with Legos. So on these Legos, I intentionally circled the 1 round connector and wrote the number 1 on it. And I did that all the way up through 6, actually all the way up through 8. And then they can match again the circles. And the really fun thing is they can actually add like a 1 and a 2 together to make a 3. So they could put the 1, 2 block together side by side, count the number of circles that are circled and see if that's the same as the 3 block if they're making an estimation. And again, I use permanent marker on the Legos. They still can build with them. They still can create things with them, but it was a way to ensure that it would not come off and rub off, so that it was there for self-correction. Here's another opportunity with number sense. Here I've taken those very same paper plates, and I've just added objects that are paper clips. Now, you can think about all sorts of things. You might want to use bingo chips. You might want to use rocks. You might have some craft materials. And this would be a fun activity if you're doing virtual, to ask the children, for tomorrow's meeting, could you go find other things in your house that might fit within those circles that you could make a game at home to play with your family, and then let us know how it worked out. It's a way to get family engagement too, so that families understand that working with children on concepts at home does not have to be expensive, and it can be fun. This next slide, again, it's an extension. Under this number sense piece, here the children are using a simple deck of playing cards, and you can see that the playing cards have numbers on it, and they've matched up 2 poker chips to the number 2. Now, again, it's somewhat self-correcting here because they have the 2 diamonds to match up. So if they touch with, finger on each diamond, oh, there's 2 of those, so then I need to find 2 poker chips. So it helps them understand that 9 is the 9 clubs. So it's that reinforcement over and over again in different ways to experience that same concept. Continuing with number sense, what I did here as a step further is I've gone back to the paper plate again, but I got a muffin tin this time. And who doesn't love Play-Doh, right? We all love Play-Doh. And I asked the child to take the ball of Play-Doh and make it match the plate for 3. Could they make 3 pieces of Play-Doh from 1? Now, some of you might be going, oh, but PM, I can't use Play-Doh. I can't disinfect it. I intentionally bought the smaller containers of Play-Doh, and you could put children's name on those Play-Doh containers, and you could even have it in a Ziploc bag. I used a simple plastic knife. So there are ways. I think we have to stop saying, I can't do it. Take a breath, get out of our emotional state, get into our frontal lobe and go, but how can I do it? How can I make it work for me and for the children so that it's fun, that it's joyful, and we're still learning together? Here's another concept under this number sense. I took and asked with a cookie cutter, can you show me 4 snowmen? Now this time they don't have the self-correcting. I didn't put the plate down. You could use it if they're not ready. And I did this purposely for you so that you could see, and this is a little bit deeper thought process for a child that might be ready. There's 4 snowmen here, but we have 3 positive and 1 negative in its appearance. And this is a fun activity to do with a child perhaps that is a little bit further ahead, and ask them how they're the same and yet different. We're still on number sense, and I have another to share with you. So under this particular one, we want children to have the ability to put things together to make bigger sets, smaller sets, make something taller or larger. So in this first photo, they've built with the blocks, and on the left, that's smaller than the one on the right because it's not as tall, even though we're using a different variety of blocks. In this one, we've just asked them to show us from big, what's the biggest one, what's the middle one, what's the smallest one, and they've just stacked with poker chips. Now, for a child that can't show you bigger and smaller, you're not going to do the 3 concept. You'll do bigger and smaller, and when they can do bigger and smaller with proficiency, then you'll introduce what's bigger, what's smaller, what's the smallest. In this particular one, we used the spatulas we had. What's the biggest spatula? What's the next biggest one? Which one's the smallest one? And they can line that up. We could have done that the same with the Legos that we had. I'm trying to think what else we might have had. We could have done that with the funnels. All sorts of ways to show number sense and fun things that they might have at home. And again, great activity to ask them to think about this and find these things in their home and then share with you the next day when you get back together, or to take photos and share that way as well. So operations is the second type of math concept we're going to talk about. And under operations, we want to place sets together to make a larger quantity or divide them to make a smaller. This is a little bit higher level, but we have the 8 circles on top of the Lego. And here we're putting 2 4 sets together to make the 8. And it becomes self-correcting because the 4 and the 4 fit. They're putting the 4 circles over top of the 4 circle on the bottom and the 4 circles over top of the other side of the 8 Lego. Here, we're asking a child with the paper plate with the 4 on it. We gave them a Play-Doh ball, and we're going to give them a plastic knife, and we're going to ask them if they can take that set of 1 and make it a set of 4. And here you see the end result of taking and dividing the Play-Doh into 4 different pieces. Now, they may not be perfect in size when you begin this. They may not be equal amounts, but we're not asking for that at the beginning. Can you divide something that's 1 and make it 4? And then the fun thing is, how can you turn that 4 back into 1? And hopefully they're going to put the Play-Doh back together. And again, who doesn't like to play with Play-Doh? It's hands-on, it's manipulative. And I wish we were together in person so that I could have all these materials on the table in front of you to play with and manipulate so that you can make more neuron connections. Under operations, we want children to be able to sort. We want them to be able to group and classify. So here it's just simply sorted by numbers. The 2s are together, the 3s are together, the 4s are together. We could ask them to sort this by color. Then we could ask them to subsort. Once they have the pile of red and blues, we could ask them to sort the reds into hearts and diamonds. We could ask them, I said blue, I meant black, sorry. We could ask them to sort the black cards into spades and clubs. There's all sorts of creative, fun ways that we can do this with simple things like a deck of playing cards. So under operations again, I'm going to share yet another concept with you. This is the being able to copy and identify a pattern. So we took the poker chips and we created a pattern of red, white, black, and green, and then the child can repeat it. But again, I'm going to back up and say, if I can't do a pattern of red and white, red and white, red and white, I can't add a 3rd color in. So you would start with 2 colors. Then when the child can do that, you would add a 3rd color. Then you would add a 4th color, and then you might alternate the pattern, but it's beginning where they're at and then building steadily on the concept. We did the same thing here with Uno cards. We just had them sort by color, yellow, green, blue, red. Now this one I chose purposely to do the ones on purpose because, you know, you could do the first sort by just yellow, green, blue, red. But then I chose to purposely identify this pattern with only the one cards. So, you know, you can make it layered and more difficult after they learn to sort just by colors in the pattern. Then you could ask them to sort by colors and numbers, which is represented here in the picture to the right. So the next concept around cognition and math that I wanted to share with you is measurements. What we're doing here is we are comparing and contrasting objects. And the first picture here, what I did is I asked them to what doesn't belong. We're comparing this. So in the next picture, you will see they removed the yellow funnel because it was different. And then what we did is we asked them to size the, so we asked them what belongs, they removed the yellow. Then the next step, we asked them to show us sizes. And they went from the biggest funnel to the smallest funnel. And again, I'm going to back up and say, if this was a child that was struggling with this concept, we might have some children only doing it with 2 funnels. Some children might be sorting with 3 funnels. Some might be sorting with 4 funnels. Some might be using 10 funnels. We keep increasing it for the individuality of the child that we're working with. And when we use sets like this, we can explain to the families that we start where they're at, and then we make it a little bit more difficult as we go along. In this next picture that I'm going to share with you, we're still working on measurements, but I've added measuring cups. What we're going to do here is compare and contrast, and we're going to collect data to answer questions. So right now they're nesting. So we've asked them for the concept of which is bigger, smaller, but we're going 3-dimensionally this way. And then we've asked them to go sideways like we have done before. Now, what I would add to this is using our manipulatives that we have or other things in your room that you might have, we might ask them which cup holds the most poker chips and have them guess at it. We might have them decide which cup will hold the most Legos and have them fill that up and estimate and guess at that as well. And then we might, I'm trying to think what else we could see, which one, the spatulas wouldn't be a good idea because it would tip, but we could use the Play-Doh as an example, which holds the most. If we were in person, this would be great to use in many other objects in the room, but I'm just trying to stick right now to the objects that I shared with you to show you how we're purposely connecting and going across the materials we're using in multiple ways and keep layering it so that they understand a concept's not only taught with one device, if that makes sense. So in this next measurement activity, I want to talk a little bit more about that compare and contrast objects, but specifically using measurements in non-standard ways. So I really can't use a tape measure if I don't know numbers, but what I could do is say, can you make your Play-Doh as long as the spatula? Or I wonder which spatula is as long as the Play-Doh. You can ask things like, I wonder how many paper clips long this Play-Doh is. And then once they can do that, you can even say, I wonder now if we could make our Play-Doh only half of those paper clips, or could we take 2 paper clips off? And I'm counting here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we try again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 paper clips. Can we take 2 paper clips off? How many would we have left? And we'd count them. Can we make our Play-Doh only 5 paper clips long now? And then again, everybody's hands are moving. We're understanding concept. We could all be doing the same time, even if we're virtually doing this. So under geometry and spatial relationships, what we're talking about here is how things fit together, how they work. So I'm using the concept of paper clips here. We can put multiple paper clips together to make it bigger. We can connect Legos that we had in there to make it a longer set of Legos. You can put the spatulas top to bottom across to make one big spatula. You can think of all sorts of ways to show how things fit together. A real simple way, and we do this with young children, is puzzles. Puzzles are geometry and spatial relationships, and a fun activity for families to do at night together, or during downtime when we get snowed in, which some of you might be. As I'm taping this, I know we have a lot of snow outside right now. When we talk about geometry and spatial relationships, we're continuing that concept about how things fit together, but we need to be aware of spatial relationships, directional words. So I use the Play-Doh here. Can you put the paper clip behind the Play-Doh? Can you put the paper clip in front of the Play-Doh? You could ask them to get up from their chairs and stand in front of their chair. Can you stand behind the chair? We're continuing with the Play-Doh once again with more directional. From left, the paper clips on top. The middle picture, it's in the middle. And on the far right one, the paper clips on, it's beside the Play-Doh. So under this particular one, under geometry and spatial relationships, we've actually taken the poker chip and the blocks and asked the children, after we've experienced with the Play-Doh, can you show me the poker chip on top of the block? Can you show it to me under the block? Can you show it to me beside the block? The sky's the limit here. Think about all the materials that we used, even the measuring cups. Can you show me the poker chip inside the cup? Can you show me the poker chip on top of the cup, beside it? Again, the more time that they experience it, the more times they manipulate it, the more real that it becomes, and the more connections that are made in the brain, as long as we're in the frontal lobe, that calm learning experience. Under the geometry, spatial relationships continued. In the first, we need to be able to talk about cubes, spheres, and then cones. And so as I was doing this, sitting in the living room, I looked up and there's a Puffs tissue box. So that's a cube, just like the cube I have. And you could introduce the concept of a cube and have the children in between classes bring 2 cubes apiece that they can show you at the next virtual meeting. I love ice cream. So of course, as I thought about cone right away, I thought about my ice cream cone. And then for the sphere, I thought about the tennis ball that I have to sometimes use on the bottom of my foot when I get a cramp. But we all have these objects in our house, and it would be a great scavenger hunt for the children to use virtually in your classroom. So you can think of creative ways to do this. On the reflection part, what I want to bring you to as we're beginning to close our time around these strategies that I've shared with you and these math concepts, we have explored just a few simple math ideas, probably not enough to what you wanted, but I wanted to make sure that you understood we need to slow down and make it simple. It needs to be hands-on. It needs to be exploratory instruction. When children and you are laughing and finding joy in your building of community and creating neuron connections all at the same times, you're creating happy families that are understanding that learning is accomplished best in the presence of joy. You leave this child and family with a generous gift that learning can be and should be fun. And the bonus is that just maybe that as you're accomplishing your academic goals while honoring the beautiful young gift that you've been given in those students, the student will learn to turn their passion into a profession. When we support young children in their passion and in their play, they might just lead to a promising career. I want to tell you that this is really personal for me. This picture on the left is my son when he was 2. On the right, he's 17. He has taken that passion that he always had of wanting to take things apart and put them back together. He built his first car. I'm sorry, he wasn't 17. He was 14 when he started that because he could drive it when he was 16. And then he turned that passion into owning his own business. He's 22 and has his own auto collision and repair shop. And what I'm trying to point out here is when we leave children to be who they are and guide them in purposeful play, we honor the gifts that God gave them and the passions that they were born with. So you can be that difference. And I know you will. And I know that you are going to find purposeful play that is hands-on when you go back to work tomorrow. Because after all, aren't we looking for problem solvers in the 21st century? Isn't that what we want these children to grow up to be? Is productive adults that have good hearts and faith, that can follow their gifts and figure out how to solve problems. When we approach things through play, investigation, and reflection, we're giving them the skills that they need not only during a pandemic, but into adulthood. I thank you so much for being with me today. I hope I have left you with at least 1 or 2 nuggets of information that you can use as you go forward in your so important critical work. I do want you to know that the materials that I've used and the ideas that I came with, I have referenced on. I'm sure that the PowerPoint will be available to you so that you can go back and find those wonderful resources. And again, thank you for joining me. And I want to thank RCL Benzinger and Kendall Hunt for making this opportunity available. And I thank you for your time and all that you do. I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you.